Livni and Netanyahu still battling for power in Israel, but decision day is looming. The president has to choose a potential leader and there's almost no sign of compromise. Who's going to work with whom? Who can work with whom and who wants to? Scenarios are plenty in the battle for the Knesset. This is Inside Story. Hello everyone, I'm Kamal Santamaria. When democracy produces an election with no losers, two sides claiming victory and a possible outcome of neither side actually winning, you know the formation of a government's going to be no easy thing. But that is where we find ourselves today in Israel, and the final results, due on February 18, aren't expected to clear things up any further. And so it will fall to just one man to decide who should take Israel forward. Shimon Peres, a man in an otherwise ceremonial role as president, who suddenly has the equivalent of a casting ballot. Now, Tzipi Livni's Kadima party did win the numbers game in this vote, make no mistake. But it may not be the party which receives the highest number of votes which leads the next government. Only the party the president believes is most likely to succeed in forming a coalition. And so we have our key players in the puzzle. Livni and the centrist left Kadima party, as we've already mentioned, Benyamin Netanyahu's right-wing Likud, Ehud Barak's Labour Party, and Avigdor Lieberman's Yisrael Beitenu party. Are the options there to form a workable coalition which doesn't risk splintering later on, or would the other option of a national unity government have any great chance of success? That would of course mean Kadima and Likud joining forces and combining their seats, and really, what chance that? Let's talk about all these issues with our guests today. In Tel Aviv is Zalman Shoval. He is the head of Foreign Relations Bureau at the Likud party. Also in Tel Aviv is Yohanan Pleshner, an Israeli politician. He is a member of the Knesset for Kadima party. And in Nazareth is Jamal Zahalka. He is the chairman of the Ballad Bloc, also a member of the Knesset. Gentlemen, thank you to all of you for joining us on Inside Story. Yohanan Pleshner in Tel Aviv, I'll come to you first of all. What chance, realistically, of a national unity government, a grand coalition from your point of view?
I think the chances, the probability is there. It's difficult to assess the exact probability, but it's almost impossible for us in Kadima to form a government without the Likud, and therefore if we are to form the government, it would be a national unity government with the Likud in Kadima at its basis. There are views within Kadima, and I'm part of them, that there's an opportunity now to form a government with a civic agenda, with Likud, Kadima, and Lieberman's party around a domestic civic agenda to try and move forward a number of issues, including electoral reform that would help stabilize the system.
Zalman Shoval in Tel Aviv, let me come to you with the same sort of question. Do you think this is possible?
Well, first of all, I think I must make one thing clear. There's no possibility, I mean, not even a theoretical or mathematical possibility for anyone but Netanyahu to form a government. But the dilemma for Netanyahu is obviously, will it be a narrow-based government, which he does not want, or a national unity government, including Kadima, of course, hopefully also Labour and other parties. But that is still a big issue. It's still a big problem. You know, it's a bit like the, how do you call that, the Sudoku thing which you have to put together. It's not easy, but we will know. It's not something which will be decided this week. It will be decided probably within a few weeks, and there is time. I mean, the country may not have enough time, but the politicians have time, 2 or 3 weeks or even more, to form a government. And we were in similar situations in the past. With regards to national unity government, I don't know about the exact formula, but it's certainly something which is needed. It's something that most people in Israel, I think, want. And there is agreement between all the major parties on the most important issue. I mean, besides the things which Mr. Plasner mentioned, the most worrying issue for Israel is Iran. And on the issue of Iran, there's no difference of opinion between Likud and Kadima and Lieberman and some of the smaller parties.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems there are actually the two parties might have a lot in common. Actually, we'll talk more about that later. I'm interested in what you said at the start of your comment, though, about the fact that a government can't be formed or can only be formed by Benyamin Netanyahu, because I want to bring you a quote here from your president, Shimon Peres. He says this: "I plan to respond to the people's wishes, and the people haven't asked me to impose anything. The people have told me to consider the election results with integrity and in accordance with the law, and I can only make a decision after I consult the parties." So, Zalman Shoval, it's not really fait accompli that it has to be Benjamin Netanyahu who forms the next government, is it?
Yeah, but first of all, knowing Shimon Peres very well, I know he will do the right thing and he will be do the legal and moral thing. But at the end of the day, he will have to see who has more support or more supporters mathematically among the 120 members of the Knesset.
So let's get a different perspective now from Jamal Zahalka, who is a Knesset member with the ballot bloc. He's in Nazareth. What's the Arab-Israeli standpoint as far as a unity government goes? Is there support for it? How do you feel?
No, first of all, we are not going to recommend to the president, not for Livni, not for Netanyahu. The difference between both is not so important, and both doesn't want peace and support war against Gaza. I think, politically speaking, beyond the maneuvers of Tzipi Livni and Bibi Netanyahu, the political gap between Likud and Kadima and Labour is narrowing and almost disappeared. So there is no significant practical political differences between them. All these, the mainstream parties in Israel adopted the policy of crisis management and not crisis resolution. So they are not going to solve the Palestinian problem or the conflict between the Israeli-Arab conflict, but they want to manage it. So the differences are small, are petty, about tactics and not about strategy. So I think there is a political basis for a cabinet of the government, unity government, and maybe the differences now are on who will be in power. The main confrontation between them, who will be the prime minister, who will get this ministry and that ministry, and not political debate or political differences. I think that Tzipi Livni is maneuvering to get rotation in the prime ministry. She wants to be half of the period prime minister. She has no chance to be the prime minister all the period. She is trying to force Netanyahu to agree to a rotation in the prime ministry.
Okay, let's put some of this then to Yohanan Pleshner in Tel Aviv from Kadima Party. I guess there in Nazareth saying you felt there was perhaps some manoeuvring by Tzipi Livni heading towards the premiership. I would suggest, even, and I'd like to get your view on this, that she's got perhaps a problem with Shimon Peres because he already gave her an opportunity to form a coalition government and it didn't work, which is why we went to elections in the first place. Does that put her on the back foot immediately almost?
No, that's it was in a completely different context, and President Peres appointed Livni to try and assemble a government, but she chose not to assemble it under the conditions that were available. Then Shas, the ultra-Orthodox Shas party, made demands that did not make any sense from the national interest, and therefore Tzipi Livni preferred to go to an election. Today we're in a different situation altogether. The truth is that neither Livni nor Netanyahu at this point can form a government of their own. Netanyahu does not have more than 60 members of Knesset to recommend him, neither does Tzipi Livni have, and in this sense there's a basis, both a practical basis for a national unity government, but also an ideological one, both in terms of a civic agenda that I mentioned before, and in terms of a national security and peace process agenda, because the major parties in Israel understand that we have to persevere with the peace process. On the one hand, there might be some differences on the nuances, but I don't think that neither Netanyahu nor Livni want to stop the negotiation on a final settlement. And in this sense, I disagree with what was said before me about conflict management rather than conflict resolution. We're interested in resolving the conflict, but we're also realistic about our partner's ability right now to make the concessions that are required. And in this sense, there's a basis for government, both in terms of security policy and civic agenda. And it very much depends, I think, from our perspective, on Netanyahu's preferences, whether he wants a stable national unity government or a less stable right-wing government that he will find also very difficult to assemble and possibly impossible to assemble.
Just a really quick thought from you, Mr. Pleshner, before we go to the break about the electoral process itself. Does this, what we're talking about, everything we're talking about, does it make you question the whole electoral process, given that your candidate technically, well not technically, did win this election, and yet we still find ourselves in this position?
There's no doubt. Israel, for the past 60 years, has been operating. We have a stable, democratic regime that proved itself. There were no crises, and in this sense, we have to put the discussion and debate in perspective. But for the first time in 60 years, we have an outcome of an election that does not produce a clear winner. And in this sense, we have to slightly modify our system in order to strengthen the major parties and in order to make sure that an election campaign ends with a decisive outcome. For that, we need a proper coalition that will be able to initiate those changes, because some of the smaller sectorial niche parties are not interested in a change or modification that will strengthen the large parties.
Stick around, everyone. We're going to talk more about this apparent stalemate even, in Israeli politics after the break. Stay with us here on Inside Story.